Hey, welcome to our End Times Bible study. This is the weekend of May 15th and 16th. Hopefully, you've been paying attention to events that have been happening in and around Israel. You can see in all of these events that these are precursors of end times events that will be happening. Jesus warned that these kind of events would be happening, that there would be wars, there would be rumors of wars, there would be nations rising against nation. That's ethnos against ethnos, or ethnic groups rising. There's going to be racial tension. There will be famines, earthquakes, pestilences. All of these are the beginning of the birth pangs. And so as we see the events that are taking place and unfolding in Israel, a lot of those are really just precursors of the kinds of events that will come. You can also get an indication that the group that really hates Israel is not the European Union, not the old revived Roman Empire, like many prophecy teachers have taught for years and years. The EU may not like Israel that much, but they don't have that same hatred and bloodlust. The bloodlust around Israel is all of the nations surrounding Israel. You see the nations of Iran, who's really the head of all of this. Iran operates with proxies in the Middle East. They have the proxies of Hezbollah in Lebanon. They have the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that has really been responsible for firing a lot of the rockets that you've seen in Israel. You have Hamas, who's also a big part of that. And you've had the nations of Turkey, of Jordan, of Egypt coming out saying it's Israel, you need to stand down. Israel, just kind of let these things happen to you. Israel has every right to defend themselves, and the world gets mad when Israel does. You know, the amazing thing in all of this is that you think of this small country, which is relatively small. It's smaller than most of our states in the United States. It is just a small little postage stamp size country, yet all of the world focuses in on Israel so much. It, to me, is a good indicator of everything that the Bible says, that it is real and true. Why would the world care so much about Israel? And why would the world hate it? Why would Satan hate it so much if it were not true and were not real events that were happening? Well, this study is on Revelation and prophecy. This is on not just the book of Revelation, which we will eventually get into, but it's understanding the Bible's prophecy about the end times events. And we have been going through and wading through the book of Daniel. Daniel gives a lot of key indications about what the end times events are all about, what the world events are going to happen. We need to understand the book of Daniel if we're going to understand what the end times events are. Jesus and Paul both refer to the book of Daniel in Paul's writings, in Jesus's teaching. Jesus himself in Matthew 24 really talks about the book of Daniel. He says, if you want to understand, go to the book of Daniel, and in the book of Daniel, you will understand it. It's all going to make sense, and Daniel laid it all out. So we have been studying through and looking and trying to understand what Daniel is all about and how we can relate to all of this as we watch the world's events taking place and unfolding all around us. So let's dive into God's word here today. Let's get back into the book of Daniel and talk about the end times events. So we are in Daniel chapter 11. Daniel's chapter 11 and 12 are the closing of the book of Daniel. It's the final vision that is given. Let me give you a quick recap on what we have been talking about, and then we will dive into God's word here today. So to understand the book of Daniel, we have to understand the 5 visions that Daniel was a part of. 4 of them he had himself. 1 vision he did not have. It was through King Nebuchadnezzar, but Daniel would interpret this vision and help bring understanding and clarity to the vision. So the first one happened in chapter 2 of the book of Daniel, and this was the picture of, or the vision of, the statue. Now the statue represented 5 different empires that would come to rule and come to power in the Persian area. Now, if you look at the Persian area, all of these empires would rule in that same general area. And it was from Israel on the west, from Israel to the east, to the north, to the south. This is the direction of the empire. So that empire, all 5 of these empires would encompass that same general area. It's therefore a Middle Eastern empire. It was covering the Middle East. It's not a Roman Empire, a revived Roman Empire. It is a Middle Eastern empire. And you can see this today when you look at the part of the world that has the most bloodlust and hatred toward Israel. It is the Middle East. They're the ones that hate Israel, that want Israel to be destroyed. And so the five empires. Now, those empires were the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and then it would be the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire would have been dissolved. The Ottoman Empire was dissolved in 1922, and then in 1923, Turkey was established as a country. So these 2 years, 1922 and 1923, are going to be important to watch in the area of Turkey. Especially, especially as Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey, has openly stated multiple times that he wants the rise of the Turkish Caliphate, or the rise of the, really a revived Ottoman Empire. And this is coming up on the 100-year anniversary since the dissolving of the Ottoman Empire. And so this could be a significant time that there will be celebrations, that there will be a push by the Turkish government, by President Erdogan himself, to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Caliphate. And so that could be the fifth empire, the regathering of the Ottoman Empire. If you look at all of those groups that are attacking Israel today, when you look at the proxies that Iran is the head of, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other proxies throughout the Middle East, Iran is really the head of the snake. It is really the one controlling all of these powers, funneling money and funneling weaponry into this. What they really lack in Islam today in the Middle East is the leadership. They need the caliphate to regather and be rebirthed in order for rule and order to come over that group. And when that person does, when that Antichrist who takes over the rule of the new Islamic Caliphate, all people will gather to him. They will all gather to his leadership and his plans for the future. So this is going to be very important that you just keep an eye on these 2 years, because those are anniversary dates. 1922, the dissolving of the Ottoman Empire. 1923, the rise of the Turkish country, secular country, but they want to bring back the Ottoman Empire. So watch that. That was the first vision that Daniel had. Daniel would have he would have four more visions that were very important for us, again, to understand about the end times events. Next, he had a vision in Daniel chapter 7. And in Daniel chapter 7, the vision he had there was of these beasts that were coming out of the waters. These four beasts that were coming out of the sea. Now, the four beasts, again, what did that represent? It was four empires. And again, you can look at these empires and say, okay, that was the Babylonian Empire, that was the Medo-Persian Empire, that was the Greek Empire, and it was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire that was dissolved will come back to life again. So there's the four empires. It really corresponds to the statue, because the final fourth and fifth empire were legs that were iron, and then feet that were iron and clay. So it's a revived thing that is going to happen. So there's four empires. And in the fourth empire, this revived empire, there was this beast that came up that had 10 horns. The 10 horns represent a 10-nation coalition, a 10-nation confederacy. And this 10-nation confederacy, that 10-nation confederacy is 10 nations that will join together into this Ottoman Empire, or this Islamic Caliphate. Now, it says in chapter 7 that out of these 10 horns, or these 10 nations, there will come what is called the little horn. Now, the little horn will be someone who is basically insignificant, who will come up and will destroy 3 of the horns, and will take control of this empire. And this little horn is the Antichrist. That's where the Antichrist will come from. And so that was the understanding of what's going to happen. There will be a rise in the fourth final empire of this Antichrist, and it will be a kingdom that is different from all the other kingdoms on the earth. It will devour the whole earth. It will trample it. It will crush it. Out of this. Out of this 10 kingdom, 10 nation coalition, 10 kings that will come up, there will be the one little horn that will subdue three of them, and all others will bow down to his rule, and he will take control of this empire. Now, what is the empire's goal? The empire's goal will be to destroy Israel. That is always the goal. We often think of the end times events, and it will encompass the whole world. The whole world will be caught up in this, but Israel is always the focus. Israel has always been the linchpin or the time clock for all of the events that have been happening in the world. So always keep your eye on the Middle East, keep your eye on Israel and the things that are happening to Israel. Like I said, the things that are happening today in our world, they are precursors of what could come. Now, what I could see happening out of the events that are happening right now is that Israel will establish they will establish a sense of control, and they will even maybe influence some authority over the Temple Mount area. They will then also possibly have the foundations for building a new temple, a new temple to worship God in, that could come out of all of the battles that are going on right now. So really keep your eye on the things that are happening. Again, these are precursors. These are not the events of the end times themselves. These are the events that are leading up, the wars, the rumors of wars that you will be hearing. Then we moved into the third vision, which is in chapter 8. And in chapter 8, what we saw in this third vision was the vision of the ram and the goat. And the ram and the goat were Ram and the goat were the empires, the second and third empires, the Persian ram and the Greek goat that would come together. That was the Medo-Persians being taken over by Alexander, who would be represented by the goat, the Greek Empire. Now, the reason this is important is out of the goat is going to come four empires. Four empires would come out of the goat, and this is the indication that it says in chapter 8. Four empires will come out of this, and out of one of those empires, out of one of them, will be the nation or the area where the Antichrist will come out of. So we look at that and we trace that back and we understand, well, what are the four empires that came out of the rule of Alexander? He was the great leader of the empire, and then when he died, it was split into four out of one of those areas. Now, most likely those are going to come out of either the area of Turkey or the area of Iran, which is modern day Turkey, those kind of areas. So that may be where it comes from, but it's not confined to Turkey or Iran. The empires that one of those two had were a large empire, a large encompassing area, can come out of either of those areas. Again, what does it point to? It points to a Middle East beast that will come out, and that will be ruled by a Middle Eastern Antichrist, which fits with the idea of the Islamic Caliphate, who the desire is to bring rule and to bring their religious plan and their religious views of domination to the world. And everything that they did in the past really fits with everything that the book of Daniel talks about in the future. So that is in chapter 8. Then we come to chapter 9, and in chapter 9, what we saw, the next picture of the visions in chapter 9 was the idea of Messiah and the idea of the end. And so you had this idea of the 70 weeks. Now remember, that's 70 heptads, 70 groups of 7. So it's not 70 weeks, it's actually 490 weeks, or it's 490 years, because weeks was not literally weeks, it was better described as heptads. So what it was 70 groups of 7. And if you count those as years, that's a matter of 490 years. So it gave you the exact time of when Jesus would come, or when the Messiah would come. He would come in a total of, there would be a 7-week period, a 62-week period for 69 total, 69 groups of 7. That would be the 483 years. Jesus would come, or Messiah would come, 483 years after the giving of the declaration to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. Now we know that happened in the book of Nehemiah. He was given that command. They know the date, so you can then go forward from the time of Nehemiah, and what that brings you to is the exact time of Jesus entering into Jerusalem in what was called the triumphal entry. An amazing kind of concept, and that happened on the 483 years after Nehemiah was given that command. Now there's a final week because it's a total of 70. So what would happen is, after Jesus, there would be from Nehemiah, there would be the 483 years to the time of Jesus, where the Messiah will be cut off for the sins of the people. Then you have a large gap. And the gap, we don't know how long the gap is, because it doesn't say how long the gap is going to be. But after the gap is done, then you will have a final 7-year period. And that is the final 7-year tribulation period. And that's what Daniel chapter 9, the vision given there, shows us. Now, that brings us then to the final vision in the book of Daniel, which is encompassing not just a single chapter, but it actually encompasses 3 chapters. And in the book of Daniel chapter 10 through 12, you're going to see the final vision that Daniel's going to receive, the most intense vision that he is going to receive. And this is really the vision of the Antichrist himself, and it is the vision of the tribulation events. And so here's what we see in the final chapters, chapters 10 through 12. Now, chapter 10 is really the giving the story of leading up to the vision. And the story was that Daniel was having a vision. An angel came to give him this vision, but the angel was delayed by 21 days because the angel was caught up in a spiritual battle with a demonic leader called the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece. So those two are the ones that are featured in chapter 10. It's mostly the Prince of Persia, but the Prince of Greece will also come. So there are demonic rulers over different regions of the world, and that was what the Prince of Persia was all about. So chapter 10, the vision is coming to Daniel, but the angel who's bringing the vision is delayed because of a spiritual battle. Because the spiritual battle is very real. Paul says we don't battle against flesh and blood, but against the princes, the principalities, the powers of this present darkness. Chapter 11, then, so that's chapter 10, is more of the angelic story, the angelic vision that Daniel has. And then you have chapter 11, which is primarily history, until you get into verse 21 through 30, and that is going to become the end times events. And I will show you why that is. Last time we also looked at some history of Antiochus Epiphanes. Let me get into that in just a minute as well. So the final tribulation is going to be laid out in Daniel chapter 11, and here's how it is laid out and broken down. So here's what you have. You have the before the tribulation events. So those events are leading up. These are the leading up, or the precursor events that we will look for. So these are things that you can be looking for. Then you have the during the tribulation. Now, regardless of what your stance is on when the rapture occurs, all of these are before the tribulation. Therefore, most likely, regardless of what your stance is, these would be before the tribulation. If you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, which I don't agree with scripturally, but there's a lot of great teachings that will cause you to pause and think, but I just don't think that the Bible gives clear indication that that is actually the case. I think that there's too much that really is opposite of that, but if you believe that that's where it is, I think that the pre-tribulation rapture probably would be here. That's the pre-trib rapture. If the pre-trib rapture does not happen, then you will see these events that happen during the tribulation, and that's verses 31 through 45 in the book of Daniel, and we're going to look at that. We may get to that. We may not get to that today because this is what we primarily are going to cover today. And then you have the events that are going to take place after the tribulation. Now, after we talk about those events, then it will be broken down in this way. Then we're going to have some details about the tribulation. So in chapter 12, we are given some specific details about what's going to happen in the background during the times of the tribulation. Daniel's going to be given a command to seal the vision that he's just received. In other words, this vision, you don't have to share it yet. This vision is going to be sealed up. This vision is not going to happen until the seal is broken. Now, could that correspond with the seals events that happen in the book of Revelation? Very possibly. The vision is sealed until the seals are broken. When the seals are broken, then all of this stuff comes together, and it all starts to make sense. Do you know that every real generation leading up to our generation, none of these things made sense because they weren't seeing these world events. But we have everything that has come together to start seeing these events, and perhaps it's going to happen in our lifetimes, maybe in the not too distant future. I mean, these things seem to be happening more and more rapidly. The speed of things are really just accelerating. Then you have the length and the severity of the tribulation that will be discussed, the sealed purpose of the tribulation, the transitional days after the tribulation, and then the final thing is just an encouragement to Daniel through all of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by getting into the before the tribulation events. So we're going to look today at chapter 11, verses 21 through 30, and we're going to understand the events that took place, that are going to take place. These are for us future events that will take place prior to the tribulation. They have not taken place, and I will show you why they have not taken place, but we have been given an example of the types of events that will happen. So last week, or 2 weeks ago, the last teaching that I did here on our end time study, I gave you a precursor of the events that will happen. And what we talked about a couple of weeks ago was this. We talked about a person by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes as a type of Antichrist, that he would do all of the things that the book of Daniel talks about. So in Daniel chapter 11, verses 21 through 30, what we are seeing is two things. We are seeing Antiochus, who fulfilled a lot of the events, but not all of the events that it says in Daniel chapter 11, 21 through 30. He fulfilled a lot of it, but also the Antichrist will also fulfill all of it. So he was a type of the Antichrist. Now, why would God give us types? The idea of types is something that is common throughout all of Scripture. There are types of people in the Old Testament that are fulfilled later in the New Testament. For example, you have all kinds of types of Jesus. Moses is a type of Jesus. Joshua is a type of Jesus. Joshua's name in Hebrew, Yehoshua, is very much like the name of Jesus, Yeshua. It's almost exactly the same. In fact, the name Jesus often was translated as Joshua. Joshua would lead the people into the promised land. Well, that's exactly what Jesus would do. But Moses also delivered the people out of bondage. That's exactly what Jesus would do. There are all kinds of types. Abraham and the potential sacrifice of his son Isaac is a type of Jesus. God gives us types so that we can understand, so that we can look for, and that we can be prepared for the events that will happen. When you're given a type of Jesus in Moses and Joshua and Abraham and Isaac and in others, I mean, there's Jonah is another example of a type. We have Jonah, we have Joseph, we have Abraham. All of these are types of Jesus in the Old Testament. They are examples of, so that you will know what to be looking for. And Jesus fulfilled all of these different types. They were fulfilled in Jesus. So, in the same way, God gives us Antiochus Epiphanes as a type of Antichrist so that we can understand, we can look for, and we can be prepared for the Antichrist events that will happen. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Let's get into and look again, just as a reminder of who Antiochus Epiphanes was, what he did, and how he works as the type of Antichrist. So let's look at this. So, as a way of reminder, this is what it says in the book of First Maccabees. Now, I want you to remember that he is a type of Antichrist. He is a type of Antichrist. This Antiochus Epiphanes is not the Antichrist, but he is the type of that gives you the best indication of what it's going to be like in the end times events. And I'll show you in just a few minutes why he is just a type of, and he is not the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 11 himself. So here's what it said in First Maccabees. It says, 2 years later, Antiochus sent a large army from Mysia against the towns of Judea. When the soldiers entered Jerusalem, their commander spoke to the people, offering them terms of peace and completely deceiving them. Now, this is the key clue to what the Antichrist is going to do. Offering them and I want you just to note this in your brain, or write this down, that this is the picture that's going to happen that we need to be looking for. Offering them terms of peace and completely deceiving them. This is the practice of looking like there's going to be a peace agreement that is made. So the Antichrist will be coming in, make a peace agreement, and then break that peace agreement and completely deceive the people. Now, I want you just to store that away in your brain for a few minutes, because I'm going to come back to this as we get into Daniel 11, verse 21. So then Antiochus suddenly launched a fierce attack on the city. So he offered them peace, and the result of the peace was they let their guard down. So they dropped their guard. They felt like, hey, we've got an agreement here. We don't have to worry. We can feel at peace. Well, once they let their guard down, he completely deceived them. He launched a fierce attack on the city. He dealt it a major blow. He killed many of the people. He plundered the city. He set it on fire, and he tore down its buildings and walls. He and his army took the women and the children as prisoners and seized the cattle. So that is what's called taking plunder. Well, that's what the Old Testament talks about with the time of Jacob's trouble, that this Antichrist beastly empire will come in, and they will do those things. They will have a fierce attack. They will deal a major blow. They will kill many of the people. Many of the people in Israel will die. The city will be plundered. They will set it on fire, they will tear down its buildings and its walls, and they will take the women and the children as prisoners, and they will seize the cattle. That's all of the plunder that it says here that they're going to do. So that is what Antiochus Epiphanes did. That's the picture, again, the type of the events that will happen in the Antichrist. So let's keep going and just, again, remind ourselves a little bit more. In First Maccabees, it goes on to say this: he ordered them not to offer burnt offerings, grain offerings, or wine offerings in the temple, and he commanded them to treat the Sabbaths and festivals as ordinary days. So in other words, he will change the law and times. You can't worship the way you always have. You can't follow the Sabbath. You can't follow the festivals. You can't follow the 7 feasts that God has given you. None of the festivals, none of the Sabbath. They're just ordinary days. They were even ordered to defile the temple. The defiling of the temple would become the abomination of desolation, or the person who's doing it, who in this case was Antiochus Epiphanes, he becomes the abomination of desolation, defile the temple and the holy things in it. Now they were commanded to build pagan altars, temples, and shrines, and to sacrifice pigs and other unclean animals there. The penalty for disobeying the king's decree was death. So the king's decree was the ultimate law, and if you don't follow what the king says, the result of that is death. That is the picture of what the Antichrist will do, and we can see it in Antiochus Epiphanes as a type of the Antichrist. Now, one more reminder from the book of First Maccabees about Antiochus Epiphanes and what he did, and I want to show you just one more, just as again a reminder, so that you will again understand this Antichrist picture. On the 15th day of the month of Kislev, in the year 167 BC, King Antiochus set up, and look what it's called, the awful horror on the altar of the temple. That was the idea of the abomination of desolation. That is a picture and a type of the abomination of desolation event. He set up this on the altar, this abomination of desolation. Pagan altars were built in the towns throughout Judea. Pagan sacrifices were offered in front of the houses and in the streets. On the 25th of the month, the same evil people offered sacrifices on the pagan altar erected on top of the altar in the temple. Mothers who had allowed their babies to be circumcised, in other words, Orthodox Jews, those are the Orthodox, the ones that follow Torah, who had their babies circumcised on their 8th day, these mothers were put to death in accordance with the king's decree, and their babies were put to death, being hung around their necks, and their families and those who had circumcised them were also put to death. So all of the Orthodox Jews, the ones who were Jewish, but not just Jewish by law, Jewish by orthodoxy. They were committed followers of the Jewish faith, of Jewish Torah. Those are the ones that were put to death. This happened on this awful horror on the altar of the temple. Now, all of this is a picture of what happens in Muslim Islam belief. The Muslims who are following the practice and the religion of Islam will set up, how about this, set up pagan altars in the towns. What are the pagan altars? Those are mosques that will be set up in these communities. In the communities, people will be told you either worship Allah or you will be put to death. You renounce God, you renounce Yahweh God, you renounce the God of the Bible, and you will worship the Allah as God, Allah being great, and if you do not worship, you will die. Now, who are the ones that are going to resist? It will be the Orthodox Jews who will not turn on God, because if you turn on God, you are breaking the first and second commandment, to have no other gods before him, and to not create an idol or worship any kind of an idol. So who will be the ones who will stand up against this? In that community, it will be the Orthodox Jews. The other group that will stand up against this will be the Christian community. Now, in Israel, there are not a lot of Christians today. I think it's about 6% of the nation are Christian, but this will affect Christians across the entire region, and it will ultimately stretch into the entire world because it will affect Christians around the globe. But it will really affect Christians in Israel and in the Middle East, because this is where the beastly empire will have its reign and its rule. Again, the whole world will be caught up into this conflict because it will be unlike anything that the world has ever seen. But the main focus, the main battleground is Israel and the Middle East, and it will be the revived Islamic Caliphate coming in, demanding you set up this or you will die. Now, that is Antiochus Epiphanes as a type, but Antiochus Epiphanes is not the Antichrist. And there will be scholars who will try to say and try to fit in Antiochus Epiphanes into the picture in Daniel and say all of these events are past, they don't apply to us today. That's not the case, and here's the reason that this is not the case. Because both Jesus and Paul refer to this event being a future event and not fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes. If Antiochus Epiphanes was the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 11 and 12, then Jesus and Paul would not have referred to these events being future at the end of all days, at the end of all things. Both Jesus and Paul referred to these events, the abomination of desolation, the destruction of Israel, the battle that was going to happen, they referred to them as future events that are yet to have taken place. Therefore, Antiochus Epiphanes could not possibly be the Antichrist. Instead, he is a type of the Antichrist, and you can look to him to understand the events that will happen in the time of the end that both Jesus and Paul would refer to. Where did they refer to this as being a futuristic event? Well, let's look at this. Matthew 24, familiar verses to many of you. Jesus said this. So when you see, now remember the question that was asked of Jesus. The question that was asked of Jesus is, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming? What will be the sign of the end of the age? So when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? So Jesus is not talking about past events. He is talking about the end of the age events, and he is talking about his return. His return that comes at the end. It all has to take place at the end. So Jesus is giving the explanation of when you see these things. Now he gives all of the birth pang events. Those are the pre-events that will happen. Those birth pangs events. These are the birth pangs. The contractions are starting in the birth pang events. But those birth pang events lead to the beginning of what was called the Great Tribulation. Or in Revelation, the tribulation, the great one. That's the final 3.5 year period. Jesus says, when you see people that are living in the end, when you see the abomination of desolation, he's not referring to the events that happened in Antiochus Epiphanes. He's saying, when you see these events that are taking place in the future, these events that were spoken of through Daniel the prophet. Now, Jesus is referring back to the book of Daniel. He's saying these are future events that are recorded in the book of Daniel that have not happened. Antiochus Epiphanes is a type of the Antichrist. He is an example of the Antichrist to come. He is a good indication of what we should be looking for, but he was not the Antichrist. These events will happen in the future. There will be an abomination of desolation event, the same events that Daniel the prophet spoke about. When you see the abomination doing exactly what Antiochus Epiphanes did, standing in the holy place. What did he do standing in the holy place? Well, he had a peace agreement with them, then he completely deceived them, then he killed many of them. He set up pagan altars, he did all kinds of abominable sacrifices in the temple of God. He refused to let them worship on the Sabbath or the holy days of God. He killed all of the Orthodox, the ones that were committed, who had circumcised their kids, who had performed the circumcision, who were Orthodox Jewish people. He killed them all, and he took over as ruler of that place. So that's the thing that you will see. When you see those events in Judea, flee. Get out of there. Flee to the mountains. The one that's on the roof must not go down to take what's in his house. The one in the field must not turn back to get his coat. Woe to those who are pregnant and who are nursing babies in those days. Pray that your escape will not happen in winter or on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. For there will be great trouble, such as has not happened since the beginning of the world, nor ever will. This is the great time of tribulation. The time of Antiochus Epiphanes was a precursor, a type of the events that are going to happen, but they were not the events. In fact, the events of Antiochus Epiphanes pale in comparison to the events of the end, because there has never been trouble that is going to take place like is going to happen. I was watching some videos this past week of all of the rocket attacks that were happening in Israel, and I saw one news outlet that was covering people trying to get out of certain communities, and the traffic on the highways was just at a standstill. People could not get anywhere. In fact, they were abandoning their cars and walking away just so that they could so they could get out of the location that they were in. When these events happen, and this beastly empire descends upon the nation of Israel and has this agreement, but when they break the agreement and they turn on Israel, everybody will be trying to run out and escape, and it is going to be jam-packed, and the roads are going to be filled, and you just got to get out of there. Just hope it doesn't happen in winter because it can get cold in Israel. Hope it doesn't happen on the Sabbath because the orthodoxy on the Sabbath will not want to leave. They won't want to be moved. And so just pray that it doesn't happen on those days. So Jesus is referring to all of these events taking place in the future. Therefore, Antiochus Epiphanes cannot possibly be the one that is talked about in Daniel chapter 11. He is a type of the Antichrist. Paul also references this in 2 Thessalonians. Let me show you what that says. Paul says this, let no one deceive you in any way. For the day, what is the day? The day is the Lord's return. And what else is the day? He actually refers to it earlier in 2 Thessalonians. He says the day of our gathering and the day of the Lord's return. So our gathering to him and the Lord's return, that day, that's the day he's talking about. This is future. That day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, meaning the falling away of faith, and the man of lawlessness is revealed. None of this can happen. The Lord will not return until the Antichrist is revealed. You will know exactly who he is. The Antichrist will be revealed, the one who is destined to be destroyed. He, the Antichrist, opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he sits in the temple of God, proclaiming himself that he is God. This event is the same thing that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24:15, that is the abomination of desolation. None of these events can take place until the Antichrist is revealed, people fall away from faith, and the Antichrist sits in the temple of God, opposes God, exalts himself above God, proclaims that he is God. When those events happen, we are just on the precipice of the Lord's return, because the day won't happen unless those things happen first. So now, that all of that said, and again, Paul is referring not to past events of Antiochus Epiphanes, he's referring to future events of things that will be coming and will come at the end in the final 7-year period, the final 1 week that was talked about in Daniel of the 70-week vision that he was given. So let's just keep going. Let's go through this a little bit more in Daniel chapter 11. Let's pick it up here. So now here's where we've come to. We've come to the before the tribulation events. These are going to be things that are going to lead up to. So they lead up to the tribulation. Not just to the tribulation. These are the events that lead up especially to the great tribulation. And so this event, the Great Tribulation, is the midway point of the 7-year period. So we have 7 years from beginning to end. This point is the 3.5-year mark. That is the Great Tribulation. So what are the events here that lead up to the tribulation happening? Well, let's look. So it says this. Then in his place, now who is the his? Well, that was referring back to the previous thing, was referring back to all of the history. There is a verse 20 that kind of is a separate standalone verse among all of the verses. In verse 20 it says, in his place will arise one who will dispatch a tax collector to exact tribute for royal glory, but within a few days he will be destroyed, though not in anger or battle. Now I want you to just look back at that verse 20 yourself, and I want to give you my take on who that is. I think verse 20 is the entire Ottoman Empire for hundreds of years. I think that that's what verse 20 is referring to. Now, why do I say that that's the case? Because the Ottoman Empire was very typical of all Muslim empires throughout that region. Ottoman Empire was the greatest of all of the empires. Now it says, in his place one will arise who will dispatch a tax collector. Now, what is the tax possibly talking about there? Well, that is what is called in the Muslim belief, it is called the jizya. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Don't even know if I'm spelling it right. It is the jizya tax. What is that tax? Well, that is a tax that all people would have to pay if they were not Muslims. It was really a tax of people they put on who were called inferior to them. So they would come into a community, oftentimes in the Ottoman Empire or the Muslim Caliphate empires, and they would come into a community in a couple of ways. They would first come in as a minority. And in the minority, they would say, we just want peace with you. We just want to live here. We just want to be a part of who you are. We will keep our heads down. We won't cause any problems. Once the minority grew into the majority, then they, through force, would subject all of the other people in the country or in the region or wherever they were. They would put them in subjection. If people did not surrender to them, they would be killed. If people did surrender to them, they would also potentially be killed. They would be called to either relent or to repent of their current faith, or, and if you don't, we will kill you, or they will imply or apply to them the jizya tax. Now, what is this kind of tax? This kind of tax is a tax that you pay to the Ottoman Empire or the Muslim Empire, whatever it is. You pay them a tax, and they won't kill you if you pay the tax. What does it say in verse 20? A tax collector will arise to exact tribute for royal glory. Why do they pay the jizya tax? You're paying it for the royal glory. You're paying it in honor of Allah. You're paying it for a holy purpose. And we have every right to collect this tax from you because you're inferior and you don't follow Allah. So you will pay a tax. You will pay a tribute to him. So one will arise that will exact tribute for royal glory. But in a few days he will be destroyed. He'll be destroyed, though not in anger or battle. The Ottoman Empire was not destroyed in anger or in battle. It was disbanded, and in its place, Turkey would arise. So I think verse 20 is talking about completely the Ottoman Empire. That is just my opinion. Others could disagree with that, and they may be right, but that is my opinion of what verse 20 is talking about. It's the Ottoman Empire that would exist from the 1200s through until 1922, when it was disbanded and when Turkey would arise in its place in 1923. Following the Ottoman Empire, then we pick it up at verse 21. That's why I believe that this is future events. Antiochus Epiphanes would have happened a long time ago, but again, Antiochus Epiphanes is the type of things that would come and things that would happen. So let's read. Then in his place, and if I'm right, whose place is this in his place that is of the old Ottoman Empire, will arise a new empire, a new Ottoman Empire. And in this new Ottoman Empire will rise a little horn. In this new empire will rise this little horn who will be a despicable person. This is the Antichrist. The Antichrist did not have any royal honor. It had never been conferred on him. What does that mean? It means he was not born into the line of kings. He was not born into power in whatever region or whatever kingdom he is going to be a part of and come out of. He did not have royal blood. He did not have this title just given to him because of birthright. It has not been conferred on him. He will arise and he will take power, and people will bow down to him. Now, he will come in a time of tranquility. So there will be a time of peace. There will be peace that will happen. And during the time of tranquility, he will seize the kingdom through intrigue. Now, which kingdom is he seizing? Well, there's two possibilities. The kingdom is the beastly empire that he will seize, or the kingdom is going to be the kingdom of Israel. One of the two that he is going, and in fact, it's probably both that he will seize through intrigue. Armies will be utterly swept away from before him, and these armies will be broken. So the Antichrist will do a blitzkrieg across the Middle East, destroying any army that comes against him, destroying anything that comes his way, as well as the leader of the covenant. Whoever made a peace agreement will come against him. Now, that is, again, two possibilities. Somebody who made a peace agreement with the Antichrist, or it could be Israel itself who will make a peace agreement with the Antichrist, and he will break the peace agreement 3.5 years into the process. He will, after an alliance is made with him, he will act deceitfully. So the leader of the covenant will be swept away. The covenant leader of the covenant is one who made a peace agreement with him. This alliance is made with him, and he will act deceitfully. Again, this is the picture of what has happened in the history of Muslim domination in the history of the world. I know that there are a lot of Muslim people today that aren't like this, but there are a lot of leaders that are very much into jihad, into the reestablishment of the caliphate, and really are all about the bringing back in of the Islamic Ottoman Empire. The history of Muslim domination in the world has a long history of doing this, of again coming into a community, coming into a region, being the minority, keeping their heads down, making a peace agreement of some kind. Then, when it's advantageous to them, they will break the agreement and they will subject everyone else that is there. It's just been the history. It's just a proven fact that that has been the history. Muhammad, in the taking of Mecca, there was a tribe who lived in that area, the Quraysh tribe, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right or not, and I apologize if I'm not, but the Quraysh tribe lived in Mecca. Muhammad wanted Mecca for himself, but he knew he did not have the power to do it. So what did he do? He made a 10-year peace treaty, or a 10-year truce with the tribe. He signed it, they signed it. But 2 years into the treaty, he broke the agreement. He attacked the people there, the tribe there. He destroyed them. And this was a very important treaty in their history. This has been the common theme throughout history. They would come in, there would be a peace agreement that would be made, they would be in the minority. And while they're in the minority, they keep their heads low. And when they have the majority, they will break the peace agreement. They will subject the people that are there, telling them to repent and disavow yourself of your current faith. You take Allah as your God. You take His mark upon you. You take Him as your God of your life, or you will die. Repent or die. Or we will let you live, but you will have to pay the tax. And you pay the tax to us as tribute that will be wholly collected for Allah's sake. That was always the pattern that would happen. And so this is no different. After an alliance is made, he will act deceitfully. This, by the way, is also what Antiochus Epiphanes did, and we saw that earlier. That Antiochus Epiphanes, he came in, he offered them terms of peace, the Jews terms of peace, and then he completely deceived them when it was advantageous for him. And when he had completely deceived them, he killed the Orthodox, he launched an attack, he dealt them a major blow, he plundered the city, he set up pagan altars, he did the abomination of desolation events of the temple. This is what we will look for. Look for peace, and once peace happens and the guard is let down, then look for that to be broken, and look for these events to take place. The events of the abomination of desolation, the events of all that Jesus said, all that Daniel says, all that the book of Revelation will say, all the other events that it says in the Old Testament. Look for these events, for these to take place. So after the alliance is made, he will act deceitfully. The Antichrist will rise to power with a small force. He won't have a lot at the beginning. Without warning, he will invade the richest province and accomplish what his fathers or predecessors were unable to do. He will lavish on them plunder, loot, and spoils. He will plot the overthrow of strongholds, though only for a while. Now, what are those? What is the richest province? Well, the richest province is most likely the Saudi Arabia area. You have the Saudi Arabia area. You have the UAE, United Arab Emirates. You have Kuwait being in that area. You have a lot of power, a lot of influence, a lot of money in that area, and they will not want to be a part of this. They will try to keep themselves out of this. In fact, they will say to the invading forces, "Have you come to loot us and to plunder us as well?" And that's what it says in. I believe it's in Ezekiel that it talks about that, but we'll look at that later. Anyway, these events that will take place, these events that will happen, he will lavish on them plunder and loots and spoils. All of that's his army that follows him, and he will plot the overthrow of strongholds, though only for a while. So what you will see, and just these again are the events to be looking for, but you will begin to see the Antichrist rise up with a small force. He will have no power. Nothing will be handed to him. He will not be a king. He will come with a blitzkrieg across the Middle East. He will break other armies. Once he breaks a handful of armies, in fact, 3 of them, then all others will bow to him. Then he will come against probably the Saudi Arabia Peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula. He will come against them, the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, the UAE. They will not want to be a part of this. They will say, "Are you coming to plunder us?" That's the richest province. He will accomplish what his fathers or predecessors were unable to do, which is to unite the whole Middle East and to come against those who they could never be united to that extent. And he will lavish on all of these followers of his plunder, loot, and spoils. And he will plot the overthrow of other countries that are strong. So watch these events take place. Watch for a small force to rise up, for him to take power, him to take control, and a blitzkrieg across the Middle East. Let's keep going. Then he will make a firm covenant. This is that agreement. He will make a firm covenant for many for 1 week. That means, what is 1 week? Well, we've already seen that in Daniel. That's a 7-year covenant that is made, a 7-year peace agreement that is made. But in the middle of the week, 3.5 years in, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. In other words, 3.5 years in, he will do exactly what Antiochus Epiphanes did. He will break the terms of peace. He will deceive them. He will absolutely destroy the nation. He will plunder the city. He will set it on fire. He will take over the temple. He will impose Sharia law. He will impose the worship of Allah in the temple of God. He will kill women and children. He will seize them, seize cattle, he will kill the Orthodox. Those are the things that he will do. And on a wing of abominations will come the one who destroys. What is the wing of abominations? That is the event that happens at that 3.5-year mark in the temple of God. It will be the abominable act. Now, in First Maccabees of Antiochus Epiphanes, it said the awful horror on the altar of the temple. So there will be something that will happen in the temple that will be the abomination of desolations events. He will declare Allah to be God while standing in the temple of Yahweh, the temple of the holy God. And he will do this, and he will stay there in control until the decreed annihilation is poured out on the one who destroys, until Jesus returns in wrath. And when Jesus returns in wrath, he will pour out his wrath upon the Antichrist and the empire of the Antichrist in his wrath. A couple more things. 1 Thessalonians 5:23, it says this: "For you yourselves know that the day of the Lord shall come like a thief in the night, when Israel is saying, shalom and safety. Sudden destruction comes upon them like a woman having birth pains in the womb. There is no way they will escape." So what is that? Peace, 7-year agreement, 7-year peace agreement. Then what happens in the 7-year peace agreement? Halfway through, the middle of the week, 3.5 years, it is broken. The abomination of desolation. What will happen leading up to the abomination of desolation? All of Israel will say, Shalom and safety. We have peace. Finally, we have peace. We have certain peace. We can live in peace. We don't have to worry about the Arab world coming against us. We don't have to worry about them firing rockets at us. We don't have to worry about them claiming jihad and calling everybody to jihad. We don't have to worry. We can just live at peace. We can let our guards down. We don't have to protect our borders. We don't have to worry about anything. It will be 3.5 years, and it is just going to be a feeling of peace and shalom and fullness and completeness over the whole nation. They will feel completely and utterly safe during that time. They will feel safe in the nation during that time, and then suddenly everything will break, and suddenly sudden destruction will come upon them. And once that sudden destruction comes upon a nation that has their guard down, who is not prepared, all of a sudden there is no way they will escape. If there is no way to escape, what are they going to do? Jesus said, when you see this event, get out of town. Run for the mountains. Woe to you that are pregnant and nursing babies. Hope that it doesn't happen on the Sabbath, on Shabbat. Hope that it doesn't happen in the wintertime. When this event happens, all hell will be unleashed against Israel. And what will happen during that time? Well, my estimation is you will repent or die. You will bow down and worship Allah. And if you don't repent and you don't bow down and worship him, death will come upon you. They want to kill the Jews. They hate the Jews. They have a desire that all Jew be wiped off the face of the earth. In fact, in the teachings of different holy books of the Muslims, they even, in fact, talk about the trees will cry out that they will say, "Oh Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." They have a desire to see all Israel killed, all Israel destroyed. They will come with a picture of peace, but that peace will be broken. And when that peace is broken, sudden destruction will come upon them. And when that sudden destruction comes upon them, the 3.5 years will be the 3.5 years of incredible pain and turmoil, the kind that is called the Great Tribulation. That's what Jesus calls it. It's what Revelation calls it, a time of great trouble like you have never seen before. A couple final verses, and then we're going to wrap this up. Daniel 11:21 through 30 ends with this thought. It says, he will summon his strength and courage against the king of the south with a great army. This is the Antichrist. The king of the south will wage war with a very large and mighty army, but he will not succeed because of the plots devised against him. So, in the middle of the Antichrist taking over Israel, the Antichrist will take over control of Israel. He will be attacked by an army that will come against him. The whole world will not follow the Antichrist. There will be an army that will be gathered, and it will come from the south that will come against the Antichrist, but they will not win. They will not succeed because of plots devised against him. Those who eat his delicacies will ultimately destroy him, and his army will be swept away. Many will be slain in battle. These two kings, with their hearts bent on evil, will sit at the table and speak lies, but to no avail, for the end will still come at the appointed time. So what is the sitting at the table speaking lies? That's almost like a peace table. You know, we're going to sit across the table from each other. We're going to give terms of peace. We're going to try to see if we can come to some kind of an agreement, but both are going to be speaking lies. They will not come to a peace agreement. The end will still come. At the appointed time, the king of the north will return to his own land with great wealth, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant. He will take action and then return to his own land. Finally, it says this: at the appointed time, he will invade the south again. Only this time the outcome will not be as before. The ships of Kittim will come against him, and he will lose heart. Then he will turn back and vent his rage against the holy covenant. When he returns, he will favor those who forsake the holy covenant. So the Antichrist will come against Israel. He will be pushed back, and then he will come against them again with all fury and rage and veracity until the appointed time of the end. So what we're going to see is the Middle East is going to be on fire for this 3.5 year period. For 3.5 years, it is going to be intense fighting, an intense war, and an intense battle. For 3.5 years, you're going to see even nuclear events that could possibly take place. You're going to see armies that are going to be fighting. And who is going to be caught in the middle? Israel will be caught in the middle of all of these events. There will be a rage that will happen against Israel. He will have a rage toward them, and he will come against them. He will hate the people of the Holy Covenant, and he will vent his rage against them. He will try to take out as many of the Jewish people as he possibly can before the end comes. He will come against the holy people of God. That is all the events that happen before the tribulation. Now, during the tribulation, those 3.5 years, we're going to learn that in Daniel chapter 11, verses 31 through 45. So that's what we're going to cover next time. We will cover the last part of that. So those three events, the three ways to break this down: before the tribulation, which we covered today; during the tribulation, the events that are going to take place during those 3.5 years; and then after the tribulation, what events are going to happen after and at the conclusion of the tribulation events. Well, thank you for joining me today, spending this time with me. I know it was a long session today, but I hope that you learned some stuff, and I hope that you are paying attention to the events that are happening in the Middle East and around the world. Join me back here next time for the next session, and we're going to start talking about the middle events during the tribulation, chapter 11, verses 31 through 45. I will see you back here next time. Have a wonderful week, and may God bless you richly.